Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, Director of Published Content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network. You can follow me on social media at Easton Freeze. I am joined, as always, by producer JT on this Friday, August the 2nd episode. JT, there is NFL football sort of being played this evening.
Sort of. No, this is an official NFL sanctioned game, whether it is preseason, regular season, playoffs.
You cannot rebroadcast this without the express written consent of the National Football League. This is the real
correct.
Deal.
And I'm so excited. I'm going to be in my seat watching Tyson Bagent hand the football off to Roschon Johnson probably while the six stringers try to block. And I'll tell you what, I have the Green Goblin mask in the right side, the corner of my eye right here saying bet Bears +2. It's the best bet gauntlet is sitting in my corner right now, just saying bet the Bears +2 tonight. So I woke up. I woke up feeling great this morning that we have some NFL football to watch tonight. So we'll be I'll be grilling out tonight watching that. So it should be a lot of fun.
They made the Tennessee red line specifically for individuals like you. Is it
a bad thing? Is it a bad thing to sprinkle a little bit of money on someone to win or the spread?
Yes, objectively, it's a bad thing.
Or is it worse to look at the first quarter lines and say that and bet on the Bears to win the first quarter of the Hall of Fame game?
I mean, I'm not answering your question. I'm not going to humor your degeneracy. Okay. It's like it's honestly worse than like going to the roulette wheel and just putting down money on red, because it's just the thing about sports betting that is intellectually stimulating is that like you can find edges, but there's no edges in we talked about this. Did we talk about it on Tuesday? How this is going to be the preseason game to end all preseason games because these two teams see each other in week 2 of the real season. It's very strange to play a real opponent in the preseason. It's even more strange to play them when you're going to play them again for real less than a month from now. So you're not going to see anything. Ain't nobody showing nothing. Here's the question I have. How much Dameon Pierce are we going to see tonight? How much of my boy, how excited am I going to be? Here's what you should bet on. Based on Dameon Pierce's performance tonight, how many rounds earlier in pending fantasy drafts will I take Dameon Pierce?
That's a hard question because he's off my board. He's off my board okay. Regardless of what happens tonight. So, gotcha. But that's what's so great about football. We can talk about Dameon Pierce and the battle that will take place tonight between Dameon Pierce and Dario Abungawale. Like all these guys that are going to be playing tonight, I will be in my seat watching.
I might have to join you. I might just come over to your way and we can watch a terrible football game together. We'll see. We got a good show for you guys lined up today. And if you are a fan of all of our shows here on the 440 Podcast Network, Thursdays are a really great day for you. Let me tell you, I was looking before this week. There are 4 new shows, all NFL football related, out for you on this Thursday afternoon. You got the Paul Kaharski podcast that was on air a couple of hours ago. Of course, you got us here on the Hot Read Podcast doing our usual Thursday 4 p.m. deal. You've got a football show. I filled in for Braden, who I don't know. We didn't even talk about this on the show, JT. I was informed that Braden he's doing the Aaron Rodgers tour. He's in Egypt. He's checking out all the sites that Aaron Rodgers went to when he was missing.
Is he getting fined for not being
I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to read the fine print of his contract, but he told me before he left, he was super excited about going to see all the same things that Aaron Rodgers saw, really opening his mind, doing his own research, all of those things. That's really all in Braden's wheelhouse. So excited for him, taking a long weekend doing that. And then we've got the Music City Audible boys also have a new episode out today. So much football content for you for your Thursday. And really, we're just loading you up to store content, I think, for the weekend, because the weekend in the podcasting space can get kind of barren. Not here on the 440 Podcast Network. Plenty of stuff for you to store up and listen to one a day until you get to Monday. So there you go. Today we've got a lot to talk about. Wednesday morning, JT was at the Titans facility. He was there, second day of padded practice. Many notes from him. JT doing a great job out there, and I know he's got a lot of things that we're going to talk about. Amongst those things, Jeffrey Simmons, some leadership topics, going to expand on some things that Zach and I talked about on a football show earlier today. Some thoughts from Will Levis. Haven't heard from him in a little bit. Going to check in with Harold Landry, a guy who the Titans need now more than ever to have a very big season. Of course, we'll be hearing about the rookies. JT has got an article, I believe, coming out tomorrow morning on just checking in on this rookie class and asking the question, really, how promising are these rookies looking so far for the Tennessee Titans? Spoiler, it's some positive things we have to say on that front. I'm going to ask a question that I teased on Twitter with today's episode. I was thinking about this between recording a football show and this show, which we recorded last night. So in the last 24 hours, I was thinking about all the big picture questions we collectively have narrative-wise about this Tennessee Titans team. And I think almost all of them share one defining characteristic. They all have one big thing in common. And I'm going to ask the question, and JT, you and I are going to kind of talk about this. You don't know where I'm going with this, but I think you'll find this interesting. I want us to think about whether or not we're missing something. This common theme is making me wonder if we're not quite getting the big picture yet. And so we'll dive into that, kind of leave that as a teaser for you later on in the show. Some odds and ends from camp, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the Arden Key situation and get out of here on a Thursday afternoon. See it, many of you already in the comments joining us live. If you are with us live today, we appreciate you being here as always. Make sure you're watching live with us on YouTube. That's Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page, Broadway Sports Media on YouTube. Find this live stream there, and you can join Derek and Travis, Titan Travis, and D Good, Glory Day Sports, and starting with the Sobros Network, all with us already in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments on today's topics as well. So join us over there. Make sure you're liking and subscribing. And one last housekeeping thing. We have the survey that we've been advertising the past couple of shows still out there. It will still be linked in the podcast and YouTube video descriptions of this episode. It will be right there at the top. It'll say in bold, capitalized letters, take our survey. Click on that. Please answer the questions. It's a 440 Podcast Network survey that is helping us help you. We're trying to bring you guys better, more specifically tailored content to the things that you're looking for from our shows, and we can't do that unless we hear y'all's input. So take a couple of minutes out of your day, do that for us. We'd be massively, massively appreciated. Stoney in the comments asking, who is the Joe Biden of the Titans? You know, before we get into Titans topics today, JT, along those lines, you were telling me before the show you've got a big Olympics boxing take you want to get off your chest. Is there anything today that you wanted to, is that where you want to start today's episode?
No, we're not going to start there for sure. I think we need to start before we get to any of our scheduled programming.
I just like making JT uncomfortable.
Yeah, the absolute bombshell that
Hello, JT.
There we go. I don't know. I don't know why my
I don't know if it was you or me, but you said bombshell and then you disappeared.
There is a bombshell that just happened.
Okay, what was the bombshell?
Paul Kaharski, DeAndre Hopkins will miss 4 to 6 weeks with injury, which is a very big blow to this Titans team, and something that we really did not see coming. I mean, he was out there looking just fine yesterday, but that is an interesting development, I think, for the Titans. And, you know, with the ramifications that come with that, they are already down another piece to this, you know, this trio. We talked about the entirety of the offseason. You know, if one of these three main guys here goes down, who is the next guy to step up? And I think that brings up a really interesting conversation that we can have about Treylon Burks, maybe, that he looked very good yesterday in the past couple days in practice. What's going to be asked more of him? Are there guys like a Kyle Phillips or a Jaquan Jackson whose spot is now kind of secured because of this news? A lot of interesting things to get to, but your initial reactions to that news.
Yeah, so just seeing this from Paul Kaharski posted just a minute before we went live here. Titans DeAndre Hopkins to miss time with injury. Just a little bit of background from Paul's article, which I'm reading here on paulkaharski.com. DeAndre Hopkins suffered a strained knee injury Wednesday or Thursday at Titans practice. Indications are that he could miss 4 to 6 weeks. If he returns to action after 4 weeks, he would have a full week to prepare for the Titans season opener in Chicago. 6 weeks would mean that he would miss the Bears and potentially the home opener in week 2 against the Jets. That timing obviously to be determined. Sounds like you being there the last time the media was there on Wednesday, no indication on our end in the media pool here in Nashville as to when that may have happened. It sounds like Paul is not even sure whether or not that happened at Wednesday's open practice or on Thursday when it was just the Titans team out there. But a big deal for sure. And what it makes me think about first and foremost is the parallel between what the Titans are currently dealing with on the defensive side of the ball in the secondary, the guys guarding the receivers, those cornerbacks that are having to, well, one, manage an injury and one currently dealing with an acute injury where he's out for a little bit of time. Now the Titans dealing with a guy on the other side of the line and a receiver not being out there. And like what we've talked about the past couple of shows with Chido Awuzie and L'Jarius Sneed not being out there all the time at training camp, the silver lining is you're going to be given a lot more opportunities if you're a guy down the depth chart, if you're a Jarvis Brownlee Jr., if you are just blanking on names here.
Trey Avery, Gabe Judy Lally.
Yes, thank you.
Any of those guys.
Any of these guys down the depth chart at the cornerback position, you're going to be getting a lot more reps in this training camp period. The same goes for these receivers now. Like you said, Treylon Burks should be getting a lot more time with the ones. I would imagine you see more of Jaquan Jackson. I would imagine you more than just seeing more of a Kyle Phillips. Like you mentioned, not to prey on teammates' downfalls at all, but this opens the door for sure. Those guys that are on the bubble that we've talked about, okay, for sure, DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd and Treylon Burks, they're all making this team. We're pretty certain NWI making this team. We're pretty certain Jaquan Jackson draft pick going to be the kick returner making this team. There's 6 guys right there. Well, one of those 6 guys now may very well not be available for you at the beginning of the year. And so if you get to 53-man roster cut down day and it's still a question mark as to whether or not he's going to be good to go, that opens the door for guys like Kyle Phillips, like who else would even be vying? Is this just a Kyle Phillips discussion?
I mean, there are 3 real names that come to mind, in my opinion, of who this either helps or hurts or what kind of happens in the
Kearis Jackson. That's who
I was going to.
Kearis Jackson. Yep.
That's who I was going to name there. First of all, Jaquan Jackson, as Glory Day Sports says in the comments here, Jaquan Jackson hype train about to be roaring down the tracks. I don't know about roaring down the tracks, but I'm interested in maybe purchasing a ticket to see where that destination could lead us if we're going to talk
just gonna
about
go check out the big board at the station, just see where what are the ports of call. I'm flipping through the brochure.
Is it on time? What's going on? If I'm interested, right? Jaquan Jackson, I think, is the guy that we talked about on Tuesday's show as somebody really interesting, right? He is a guy that we talked to his wide receiver coach on Monday, Tyke Tolbert, who kind of said he's playing multiple positions, playing both the Z spot and the F spot, whatever that F spot is that is eluding us, that the mysterious, the mysterious F position there. But I think it brings up an interesting question here that I can ask to you. Could this mean that we see Calvin Ridley move over, right, to that more X position on the outside that DeAndre Hopkins would most likely play a lot of? And then that kind of leaves an ambiguous role here for a Jaquan Jackson, a Treylon Burks, a Kearis Jackson. I think is a guy who I think would see a lot of benefit from this for him to step up here, because he has looked pretty impressive in camp. I think he's gone under the radar, but he looks healthy. He's making a lot of plays on special teams, being a role player there. And then, of course, how much more does Treylon Burks now get involved because of this? Those are the 3 guys that I really think could, find a new role with DeAndre Hopkins missing some time. And as a lot of people are pointing out in the comments, 4 to 6 weeks, it seems like there is a real possibility that this discussion would come 4 weeks from now, because you get to that 5th week and he's rehabbing that and he's feeling a lot better. And then he rolls into week 1 just fine against the Bears. Like that could very much happen. However, I think this does, like you said, opens up the door for other guys to now prove that they belong on this roster. And I think those 3 come down to a Jaquan Jackson, a Treylon Burks, who I think is already on the roster but has more to prove, Kearis Jackson, and then, like you said, Kyle Phillips. By necessity, we talked about how little kind of outside receivers they have on this team. Does that mean now they kind of consider Jaquan Jackson to be that in-between kind of guy, and that leaves Kyle Phillips to maybe be a necessity on this roster? I think it's an interesting discussion.
So roster cut down day, when the Titans and every team in the league will be required to have a 53-man roster submitted, is August 27th. That's 3.5 weeks from now. So with the 4 to 6 week timeline is accurate, you could expect them to have some idea whether or not he's going to be more on the 4-week side or the 6-week side of things, just how his injury rehab goes the next 3.5 weeks. But that's, they're going to have to make decisions. You're not going to know for sure, I think, unless things are going really well and he's ahead of schedule. And it's like, well, man, this guy might come back a little bit before 3 weeks, or a little bit before 4 weeks, rather. I think they're going to have to kind of go out on a limb. My initial reaction to your question you posed a second ago as to whether or not Calvin Ridley changes his role in practice and how they're planning on utilizing him if and when DeAndre Hopkins is gone is, I'd imagine, and if they're not doing this, I think it's foolish. I'd imagine the Titans have thought these things through. One of the biggest boons to this receiver core, which there's a lot of positives. Like, you could argue the Titans starting 3 receivers you can put up against pretty much any other group in the league. But the biggest knock is these guys are old. And yes, they're veterans. They have a lot of experience under their belt, but they are older, and that comes with more injury risk. And so I think any responsible coaching staff would have at this point already thought through the contingency plans. Okay, if and when this guy goes down, how do we want to shuffle the deck? If and when this guy goes down, how and do we want to shuffle the deck? Like, you need to have that plan in place and not just be making it up on the fly. And so I think, one, they probably already have a plan in place for this. And two, I'm going to guess, and I'm reacting to this in real time. Maybe I'll change my mind as I think more about it. But I'm going to guess that Calvin Ridley's role, as defined by the team, doesn't really change. I think you're just going to see a lot more Treylon Burks all of a sudden, at least in camp. I think if the plan was, and this is our assumption based on what we've seen, is you're going to have Calvin Ridley really moving around all over the place, not sticking to a specific spot on the field where he lines up. And then DeAndre Hopkins is going to be more of that traditional X. They're all going to move, but he's going to line up outside a little bit more often than Calvin Ridley. I think you're just going to see Treylon Burks as that natural X build. Well, we'll just line him up outside in that role most often, and we'll keep Calvin Ridley where he's at. My question to you, JT, is, and we've talked to some folks that are some buddies of ours at training camp. We had this discussion earlier this week. Are we missing the forest for the trees? I think the number one name that this benefits is Kyle Phillips. Don't get me wrong, but we've seen this happen before, where the Titans have a sudden unexpected need at receiver heading into cutdown day, and they decide to keep one more than people were expecting. And that one more they decide to keep, his name is Mason Kinsey. I would not be super shocked, especially based on what we've seen from him and how they've used him in training camp so far. If he is the guy, what would I take him over Kyle Phillips if they're both healthy? No, I would not. But I do think they see Mason Kinsey as a slightly more versatile player in terms of where you can line him up and what kinds of routes he may be able to run with some effectiveness. And I would imagine they see him as a more durable player based on the fact that he's been durable and Kyle Phillips is not. So how floored would you be if we got to roster cutdown day, they end up keeping an extra receiver than we were planning on? They keep 7 instead of 6 because of the DeAndre Hopkins injury, and it's Mason Kinsey instead of a Kyle Phillips or instead of a anybody else on the Titans roster.
I think you saw my face when you said his name and caught me off by surprise. But then I do remember we were having this discussion, and there is some merit to this discussion.
Should we out the person whose idea this was?
I don't want to do that. I don't think we should.
Well, you know what? If it comes to pass, we will give them credit for it.
We'll give them credit. I don't
want to. We don't need to put them out there like that right now.
There are, and this is once again something that we can't really discuss, but there are signs in training camp that we've seen that tells us that this team may like what they're seeing out of Mason Kinsey a lot more than they like what they're seeing out of Kyle Phillips from some of the things and some of the ways that they're deploying these guys in training camp. And so calling back to that discussion that we had with a couple of people here at training camp and just knowing what we've seen so far, this year I wouldn't be that surprised, especially if they are liking what he's doing on special teams. And there's been a kind of discussion about philosophy with where you're going to deploy your guys come the regular season, with them playing, actually on the offense and guys who are just more special teamers, it wouldn't be, considering DeAndre Hopkins' injury and now having this precedent of, already having one guy miss some time, would it be worth bringing a guy like Mason Kinsey to deploy on special teams and maybe just special teams alone, and maybe have a guy like Treylon Burks who, may have played both that, now only really have a role on the offense right now, because you can really not afford to lose another body like that, especially when you're so thin at that outside position. Because when you really think about it, you have DeAndre Hopkins, you have Treylon Burks, and you have Calvin Ridley, who are guys who are really outside players. After that, you can talk about a Trayshawn Harrison, you can talk about Sam Schnee, people that are saying this in the comments right now. You can talk about Akirus Jackson, like
Bryce Oliver erasure.
Bryce Oliver, yeah. The point is there's not a lot of guys who can play multiple positions. And so having a guy like Treylon Burks, who now becomes so important because they have a limited amount of guys who can play the outside, at least competently, I think that's where Mason Kinsey could find a role as a guy who they're going to know does really well at the special teams. But, they can afford to have a Kyle Phillips type injury risk of having him both play special teams and, on regular snaps. And so I think that's where you could see a road for Mason Kinsey to really have a spot.
I think you nailed it there. And we can put a bow on this conversation and get to the actual planned portion of today's show. But the special teams element is the key. And we often fall, I think in real time just now, I was falling into this trap. We fall into this trap of when you need to add a guy at the bottom of the depth chart to supplant a guy that you're missing at the top of the depth chart. We forget that unless that group is really, really, really razor thin, and you expect that last guy in to get meaningful playing time on offense or on defense, the coaching staff is going to look at it from a perspective of, okay, who can be insurance for us, break glass in case of emergency guy, but ultimately can be an extra special teams body for us to justify keeping a seventh receiver on the active roster. Because you're not cutting D-Hop, right? Like if he goes into the season on IR, he has to miss 4 weeks. Unless there's a major setback with his injury, that's not going to happen, right? Because they expect to have him back week 1 or week 2 based on this timeline. So you're going to go in with D-Hop on the active roster just as a healthy scratch, but taking up a spot. You need that theoretical seventh receiver, if you keep one because of him, to do something. And that's why I think that even further bolsters the case of Mason Kinsey, or, I think a Mason Kinsey type or a Akirus Jackson type, to be fair. Both of those guys are plus players on special teams, whereas Kyle Phillips just hasn't proven to be that guy necessarily. And so that could absolutely give him the edge. Before we move on, anything in the comments as folks have been reacting to us with this that we need to bring up? I'm seeing a lot of opinions on
the one. The one is
Sam Schnee,
I would say the one thing to end off this conversation is Cooper kind of points out, I know he had a wrap, but looked fine. And TJ asking, did he leave practice early any this week?
No,
I did not see him leave early. I went back to one of our TikToks where we had a video of him one-on-one. He did have a wrap on, I guess, maybe it's the other knee, maybe it's not. He had a wrap on one of the knees yesterday during both individual and team portion. Could that have been trying to manage it and something went sideways? Possibly, but there was no indication from me out there looking at him that he was, maybe favoring that leg or anything like that. Like he looked like he was a full go yesterday. So,
okay. So that is the developing news. If anything else happens during the time of this show, we'll bring it to you here. But until then, we're going to go ahead and dive into some of the big picture topics we had planned for today's show. Now that we're a half hour in, we're going to have to really expedite the plans here, JT, but plenty of good stuff to get to. So let's start with the Jeffrey Simmons clip. And I know this story at this point is people are fatigued by it. So we won't spend a ton of time on this. I promise. We're not going to rehash what we talked about a lot on Tuesday. Just going to point out, as JT captured on Wednesday, Jeffrey Simmons did address the media, did address his actions at Tuesday's press conference, at Tuesday's practice, and then afterwards during press conference time with Buck Rising. JT, do you have that clip for us today?
Yeah, we can play it.
We all know what happened yesterday. A lot of y'all have been here since I've been here, so y'all know me that's not who I am. That's not who I want to be seen as. I talked to Buck. We have an understanding. I have an understanding. I take full accountability of my actions on the field. I mean, that'll never happen again with me. Like I said, I always talk about that switch, when to turn it on, when to turn it off. I was kind of still had it on coming off the field, of course, with the way practice went. But that, like I said, that's not me. It'll never happen again. And to all you guys, like I said, I apologize, and not because it's hit social media, but it's because who I am. That's not my character. And I think from here on out, like I said, from that point, like I said, I spoke on about it. I'm ready to move forward. In football questions, I'm here to answer. Straight.
JT, what were your thoughts here? Anything we want to? I have one big picture take, but I want to hear what you have to say.
I thought it was a great response to it. You know, it seems like, you know, coming out of there, it was very much heightened emotion on Tuesday. And so, you know, with Jeffrey Simmons being on emotion to him a little bit, and so his ability to kind of have these conversations afterwards and come to the media and be available and be willing to be available and kind of give that statement, I thought was a great move by him. And the response, I think, was well met. I think, you know, it's kind of finally putting it behind us. I think for the better. He also noted, I think you kind of talked about it. Maybe we had this discussion off the air, but, you know, he has also kind of realized that maybe keeping social media to the side and not having it during training camp and maybe into the season is probably the best move. And that's something that he really shouldn't be focusing on, especially with the magnitude of how much his voice carries for this team. So I think it's a responsible step for both Jeffrey Simmons and being able to talk to Buck and the media yesterday, for both sides to kind of put this behind us and continue kind of covering this team and looking forward to the season, I think is what I got away from his availability yesterday.
Yeah, Zach and I went into this at length on a football show earlier today. So if you want to listen to that, we spent a long time on it, and it's more than just us giving our take on what Jeffrey Simmons did and what he had to say. Like, nobody really cares about that. I understand. It was more a larger conversation about what kind of leadership this team needs and who on this team can provide that. I think it was a very interesting conversation. I've not heard anybody else in this media market have that specific conversation yet. So check that out. But what I'll say that I said there, I'll say again here, because I went pretty hard on Jeff on Tuesday's episode. And I had some tough questions for him on a football show today. But I want to reiterate that in terms of what a leader actually looks like, I said on a football show, there are two types of leaders in this world. There are leaders that sometimes make big, embarrassing, sometimes colossal mistakes. And then there are leaders that lie to you, because anybody that says that they are beyond reproach and perfect in their leadership is a liar. That's just not the way that the world works. And so when you do make a mistake, what leadership looks like is, one, recognizing it and addressing it and taking responsibility for it, which Jeffrey Simmons did very, very well at Wednesday's practice, and two, not doing it again. And so in terms of Jeffrey Simmons demonstrating real leadership in response to that bad day that he had, he has checked box 1 of 2 for me already. He has done the responsible thing, owned up to it, talked about it, worked it out, and moved on in a professional manner. That is what leadership does look like. That's a good example that he's setting for the rest of this team. The second element of that is just not making the same mistake again. And I'm not saying that he's going to do something like this again and it'll be Groundhog's Day and then we're all going to have to be like, here we go again with Jeffrey Simmons lashing out. I'm not saying that's going to happen. What I am saying is that if that does happen in the next couple of weeks during training camp, later on in the season when things are going so well, then that's going to be a different discussion and that'll be disappointing. But if he's able to learn from this, as well as having already been responsible in the way that he handled his response to it, I think that is a double thumbs up for me. That's a 10 out of 10. And that is what leadership looks like. That is the kind of leadership that I think Ran Carthon was looking for, talking about when he proclaimed Jeffrey Simmons the leader of this team. When Jeffrey Simmons came to the podium and said he feels like this is his team, they go the way that he goes, he's the leader that this team needs. I'm imagining that is what he had in mind for how he wanted to steer this team. So I commend what he did. And I think that is what real leadership looks like.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see any point to continue retreading this discussion. So I think we can move
and
on.
Another thing. Sorry. No.
We can.
What else happened to Wednesday's practice, JP?
Yeah, Wednesday we also got to talk for the first time to Harold Landry, who was finally back after being sick. So we kind of talked to him about, being in pads once again and kind of recovering from that sickness. I think if he doesn't explain it here in this clip, he did tell us that he lost about 10 to 15 pounds due to that sickness. So it wasn't just a minor illness. It was a pretty major thing that he needed to work back to. And he says he hasn't put all that weight back on yet, but that's going to be a process. But kind of just talking in this first clip about how he's kind of coming back this season and his hopes and what he's seen so far from the defense. And then the second clip right after it is kind of talking about, his perspective on Denard Wilson and what he's seen from him so far in training camp. And so here are those two clips.
Getting back out here, it's training camp, obviously tough practices. You're going to have some good plays, you're going to have some stuff you got to correct, but all in all, I feel like we're doing a good job coming out here just trying to improve. It was frustrating getting sick and having to focus to get my weight back and stuff like that, but it's all coming along fine, and I feel good and ready to rock. Oh no, he's not only a great coach, but he's a great leader of men, and guys are really buying into what he's trying to get us to do, and I feel like that's why the defense right now is just playing so fast and aggressive under his leadership.
And so I think that's a really interesting discussion because this technically is the year after the year for Harold Landry. We talked about him revving back up to that kind of caliber of play that got him that contract 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago before the ACL injury. And so far so good for Harold Landry. I thought yesterday he looked fast. I thought he looked elusive on the outside. He was contributing on those first team reps to kind of collapsing that pocket and making big plays. And so in the wake of this Arden Key kind of situation that he's going through, I'm excited to see what Harold Landry can do this season. We talk about, him not maybe being the most efficient pass rusher last year. I'm interested to see once we get further into training camp and then also into the regular season, if he's still having those issues or if it truly was just kind of getting back into his body last season. And finally, him kind of having that middle year between the injury and now, are we going to see an even better version of Harold Landry than we did towards the end of last season?
Yeah, and you mentioned it being the year after the year, something that just because of the passage of time, it's easy to forget, oh, this is the year that we really can expect this guy to return to form. Like last season, sacks, obviously not everything, but he has 10.5 sacks last season. 5.5 of them, half of his sack total came in the last third of the year. He certainly looked like you expect guys to do coming off of an ACL, like a much better player there at the end. And I think you're going to see that caliber of player that earned him that contract for sure. Derek asks, what did Harold have in terms of an illness? We don't know, but he said he kept harping on the fact that he lost a significant amount of weight. So you can imagine it's one of 2 or 3 things that you have, and you lose a lot of weight, and it's difficult when you're a football player.
That went around as well. I think it was similar to what Daniel Brunskill had at the beginning of it. Sounds like he caught
a stomach thing or a flu thing where you lose a lot of weight, and as a football player, that can be for regular folks like us, that's actually the silver lining, because it's like, man, I felt like hell all week long, but I lost 15 pounds. Right. But with these guys, it's like, I felt like hell all week long and I lost 15 pounds. That can be a really big deal for these guys. So yeah, the biggest thing with Harold Landry is just how much more important he becomes to this team in the wake of the Arden Key news, which we are still assuming is a thing. The league has not announced it yet, but I'd imagine they will in short order. We'll talk more about that later on today. His job got harder. If Arden Key is not on the other side of the ball and the Titans go add somebody, and it's him and Rashad Weaver, or it's him and Tommy Rush, or it's him and Caleb Murphy, he's going to face more double teams. He's going to face the better protection that the offense has to offer. It's going to be more difficult for him, and so he's going to have to really step up in a big way.
Yeah, I agree. Moving on to another veteran that we got to talk to yesterday. It was the first time in a while that we got to talk to quarterback Will Levis at the podium. And a couple thoughts from him. This first clip that we have is just how he thinks the offense is stacking up against the defense and kind of, stacking these days on top of each other and what he's learning from the defense, what the defense is learning from him. So here's what he had to say on that front. I probably move them
Will
around.
Levis looks really different.
Let's go through here. We can come back to
here we go.
Jarvis Brownlee. Here's what he has to say.
Here's Will Levis.
Looks and just coming back to them, and I feel like we've done a good job of not making the same mistake twice and picking them up after we've seen them. So it's like a game week when you're able to go through the pressure tape and dial in on what you're doing on all these looks. We're kind of getting to the point where we've kind of built that log of what we've seen against our guys, and it's good to see the progress we've made as of now.
So that is the actual Will Levis talking about the progress that he's making and being able to kind of evaluate those different looks and pressures he's getting right now and how important that is to him and to the offense before they really get going and face other competition that's not their own teammates. The next clip here is, I thought, an interesting one that was brought up about, Will Levis. We've had these discussions a lot about, Will maybe being a little irresponsible with the ball, trying to fit the football into windows that he really shouldn't be looking at, and how he's kind of changed that process and that thought process about maybe trying to throw the ball away and out of bounds versus trying to really fit it in there, because, at some point, throwing the ball away is most likely better than a possible interception play or a possible turnover. And so here's what Will Levis had to say about changing that thought process.
Yeah, it's both. Today in the red zone where I know I'm not getting hit, and I was kind of in between one of those throw away or try to jam it in there on like a redirect. It's just I'm going to go back and watch it. Maybe I would have wanted to throw it, but if I'm not sure, just learning to throw it away, and also having confidence in my arm at the same time. So it's a fine line, and I'm going to keep pushing the ball, keep taking those shots, and figure out what my limitations are.
A question I wanted to pose to you that I think is an interesting one is, I'll share my thoughts as well. We talked about this storyline of Will Levis kind of tweaking things during the offseason and after OTAs. What have you seen from him? I know we talked about this early last week. I think it's important to kind of, this is an ongoing discussion. And now a week later, what have you seen from Will Levis in terms of that? And do you think that he is on track to, be the guy that they need him to be? What are your thoughts about how he's fared so far in training camp?
It's funny because our buddy Flex, Scott Barrett over at Fantasy Points, was asking me this question last night. And I'll give you the same answer that I gave him, which is, let me get back to you on that, just because we have seen so little of him in this period where he is no longer tinkering. He is, they're getting the offense off the ground. They're trying to match the intensity of the defense. So far, if I had to give an opinion just based on the very little I've seen this summer, I would say it has been fine, like a fine minus, if that makes sense. Like it's been okay and not been alarming, but if it stays this way without improving, I will be alarmed. Does that make sense? I want to see more, and I expect to see more. And I think, he makes a comment. I don't know if you're about to play it or not, but he remarked on the fact that the offense is just now getting to the point where the defense doesn't know pre-practice what the offense's script is. And that's, kind of a big advantage the defense has, to know where the ball is going and what the route patterns are going to be and all of those things. So I'd imagine that kind of turns up the intensity, as well as the fact that, like we talked about on Tuesday, this offense, the complexities of this new offense, they're going to take more time to gel, between the offensive line being so new, between a handful of these key weapons being so new, having to establish more chemistry with Will Levis. You heard from Calvin Ridley after Wednesday's practice about how, he looks really good out there in a vacuum, but him and Levis don't quite yet seem to be on the same page. And they're just, they're still working through that. Star receiver, star quarterback, it takes time to develop chemistry. And you know what? Without DeAndre Hopkins out there for the next month, they're going to get plenty of time to work together and develop that chemistry. So they best use that time wisely. But that's my answer, is that ultimately, I'm fine with what I've seen so far, but it does need to improve, and it needs to improve, I think, in short order. And here's the biggest indicator to this for me is when I'm trying to evaluate what I've seen from Will Levis out there, it has not yet been demonstrably better than Malik Willis and Mason Rudolph. And that's not to say that it's been bad. They've all three been acceptable quarterbacks. It's not been like an OTA situation where it's like, where'd they find this cat to throw balls this week? This is outrageous. They can't even practice. It's not like that. They are all fine. But if Will Levis is the dude that Titans fans and the Titans team thinks he's going to be, by the end of training camp, he better look a lot different than Malik Willis and Mason Rudolph in practice. It better be something where you can take a non-Titans fan. I should be able to take my grandmother out there and ask her, who do you think the starting quarterback is? And after 30 minutes, she should be able to pretty easily identify who the best guy is out there. That's what you're looking for. I don't think, you've got, here's a jab at you. I don't think you got Trevor Lawrence and Mac Jones looking the same down in Jacksonville right now. I really don't. Your boy Mac Jones, I'm sorry. I would imagine if you're a Jaguars fan, you're hoping they look a little bit different in practice.
Well, I don't see too many tweets that say Trevor Lawrence interception by Ronald Darby again. Trevor Lawrence interception. I don't see those for Mac Jones,
Because they're not letting him throw the ball because they know he's bad. They're just letting him flip onto the pad like a good little boy, have fun running around doing front flips with the ball in his hand, and they're patting him on the head saying, "Thank you, Mac. Now go get Trevor Lawrence's jock." That's what they're doing.
I'm with you on the Will Levis. Moving back to the Titans here, I agree mostly. I think we're seeing the baby steps that need to kind of turn into normal steps for Will Levis. I think the recognition to once they start looking like an actual offense with this install and not just kind of walking through the motions, I think this is where you'll start to need to see things ramp up. But for the most part, I am with you that through these first 2 weeks of practice, it's been these baby steps of just going through the motions. And I think that's kind of what you expect. When you're only going through the motions in these first 2 weeks, I would expect all three quarterbacks to kind of look the same because they're all really doing the same thing and the coaches want them to do the same thing to see how things work. But now, I think we got the first glimpse of that at Nissan Stadium on Saturday when they start getting really into the third down reps where you're going full throttle on those. And you see, Malik Willis look the best and Will Levis. I think those are the kind of situations where you can start to really evaluate that. And I think we're going to start to see more and more of those in the next 2.5 weeks or so.
It's time to be special, right? Like with Will Levis, we need to be coming away from at least every other practice onto the show. Even if we can't find a reasonable narrative to fit it into, we get to the odds and ends portion of our camp notes where we just share all the things we wrote down. We need to be saying, hey man, there was a play. Will Levis, remember middle of the practice, up the seam, hit Chigakonkwo on a trick play, bomb, perfect placement down the middle of the field, touchdown 75. Like we need to be talking about these things. Hey, did you see him boot left, evade pressure, and then make an incredible across his, like the things we saw him do again in actual games at times last season, the stuff that we looked at and say, hey, there's something we can work with this. We can cook with these ingredients. We have not really seen that at practice so far. And so if we go all of August not seeing that, that would be concerning.
Yeah. Clip here, I just thought was a more interesting one for Will Levis as well. It was talking about, Will Levis, who, he has these three veteran receivers in DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, and Tyler Boyd. What's your thought process on kind of trying to distribute the ball evenly to all these guys who can really be playmakers for them? And so here was his answer to that question.
Spread the ball around, and you want to give guys love and show them that you have confidence in them and trust in them and that you're going to be coming to them with the ball. It's also on our play callers and everyone on the staff to script things for certain guys and getting it communicated to me or the other quarterbacks what we're really trying to get done with this play. Like there's a situation today where first and long trying to pump a go ball down the field when we can just get ourselves to a manageable second down situation, but that's just because I want to work on that with Calvin and being able to complete those down the field are going to be big for us. So I'm going to keep coming at guys, I'm going to keep pushing the ball, but also got to do a good job of understanding situations, especially once we get into these call-out periods and starting to play the game more game-like.
So I think that was an interesting answer considering what we know now that DeAndre Hopkins will miss time. It's going to become super important that with guys like Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd, two guys who are brand new to this team, that chemistry and working on that chemistry almost becomes the biggest priority for Will Levis going down the stretch here. Installing the offense, but now you're down your number one favorite target that your safety blanket, screw it. D-Hop's down there somewhere, you're not going to have him in practice right now. So I think that's going to be one of the, adds another layer on top of that Will Levis evaluation that we'll have to see down the road here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just still noodling on what that's going to mean. And you bringing up the safety blanket point is a big one. That's been something I've preached a lot the past couple of weeks, right? That's going to be a big deal. And I wouldn't be shocked to see Will Levis to DeAndre Hopkins be a hot connection early and often for the Titans. Now, I don't know. And I was just reading through some of the reactions while we were listening to that clip. Our buddy Mike Herndon points out, I think this is a fair way to calm the masses on this. It sucks to lose him for training camp and potentially for some games. But the good news is that this is an injury to one of the two positions that the Titans have on their team where if you lose a starter, it's not a complete catastrophe. And they've actually only sustained those in those positions. It's receiver and it's cornerback. And so far they've lost a couple of each, and it's not the end of the world. But it kind of puts those two positions on par with the rest of them where it's like, don't lose any more or things could get ugly.
Yeah, I agree. And so kind of making a shift here now, we can talk about, the other big, picture narratives I thought came out of Wednesday's practice. And this is part of the article that I'm writing for tomorrow that should be up on Broadway Sports Media. The rookie, impressive on Wednesday. The influx of youth onto this team, I think, is something that is going under the radar, considering all the new shiny, flashy names that they have on their team. These veteran guys who have been around the league for a long time. We should give some love to the rookies. There's been a lot of them who have been really impressive. You can talk about JC Latham, who I think he's had an up and down week in pads. I think that's fair to say, but I think that was kind of the intention, trial by fire, throwing him in, seeing if he could sink or swim against the number ones at this new position for him in pads. And I think, the first day, much like the rest of the offensive line, he struggled along with them, but the second day, I think he really bounced back, and on those one-on-one drills and pads, I think he really impressed me on those. And then another guy we keep talking up, T'Vondre Sweat. I mean, he continues to look better and better. I really enjoy what I'm seeing out of him, and on Wednesday, I think he was very impressive. And then the guy, I think the buzz around him and the hype train is about to finally start going down the tracks. Jarvis Brownlee Jr. is a name that I think yesterday after practice is a guy that everybody finally got on the same train with us, because we've been on this since the beginning of March, but everyone else finally saw.
No. February, my friend. February.
Right. For the Senior Bowl. Who is this guy? Wait, this guy, for my money's worth, is the best cornerback out here. Who is this guy? Well, for everyone else in the Nashville market, welcome aboard to the Jarvis Brownlee train. This is a guy who I think could end up being really special. I saw you tweet yesterday, are we finally on steel watch for Jarvis Brownlee Jr., a guy who we think had all the tools to work in a Denard Wilson offense, but because of his size, probably went under the radar. Now that he is here with that Denard Wilson defense, and he is looking like the best corner out there, even with guys like, veterans like Roger McCreary and Trey Avery. I keep coming back to Jarvis Brownlee Jr. and how well he's playing. There's a lot of younger guys right now who, are struggling a little bit out there, trying to hold on to some of these guys and drawing some holding and pass interference calls. Not this cat, man. Jarvis Brownlee Jr. looks already like he knows how to play the position. And, I think people are starting to take notice. So I had two clips on him real quick. We can go back to the non-Will Levis clips. Not the guy who's Will Levis. This was Jarvis Brownlee Jr. after practice yesterday. As I tried to scroll and find it here, he had two things to say, just kind of how he's faring right now in training camp, and then also, stacking these days and building his confidence. And so here's what he had to say.
I love it. I think that's when I turn it on, when it passes on. I'm not really a shorts and shirt guy because I like to put hands on people. So, how do you think you've done? I think I'm progressing every day. And for me, man, it's just stacking day by day, day by day. I know I'm going to make mistakes. All this stuff's still new to me. But for me, man, I'm just getting more comfortable. And every day you can see I'm letting it loose. So as long as I feel comfortable, I feel like I'm in a great position to just let it all out and play my game that I know I can play.
The first word, sorry, I was going to say the first word that just keeps coming to mind for me is infectious energy, both on the field with the aggressiveness and then off the field. His work ethic and from his teammates, the vibes guy that he is, that we hear from his teammates, it really seems like he's finding a role for himself in the locker room. And man, so there were times yesterday, the first player that I really, in my opinion, has been the guy that I couldn't hold or hide my excitement for yesterday when he was looking good. This is that dude, Jarvis Brownlee Jr. I think he still has a long way to go as to get to the level that I think he wants to be, but man, is he on the right track.
Yeah, I have thoughts on Jarvis Brownlee Jr. If you guys listened to a football show earlier today, I was giving our buddy Paul Kaharski a hard time about how on Tuesday he must have felt a little bit slighted because he was so on top of the Arden Key news, dropped it in the middle of practice, and then the Jeffrey Simmons story totally upstaged it. And I was giving him a hard time about that. And he was texting me about that earlier. He just broke this Hopkins news. He just texted me. He said, I think the Hopkins news is going to stay 1A story today. So let's hope for Paul's sake, for our friend Paul's sake, that nothing else more exciting than that happens in the next 2 or 3 hours or so. Jarvis Brownlee Jr., he's a guy that we have consistently been a fan of since February, since the Senior Bowl practices, and not to toot our own horn prematurely because it's a long road for him to become a plus starter in the NFL. But all indications are positive from him so far. 100%, I agree with you. We were saying consistently since the Senior Bowl on this show when we were talking about the cornerback group, when we were talking about the positions the Titans should prioritize when and where in the draft. We wrote I went back and looked yesterday. We went and wrote in our do and don't draft guide and tweeted about the idea that if they can get him as an early day 3 pick, he will be a steal. That's why I tweeted yesterday, I think we're on steal watch for Jarvis Brownlee Jr. because he looks really good out there. And I am selfishly excited to see him getting more reps because of some of the Titans' top line cornerbacks not practicing as much right now. And he has not improved, but he, during OTAs, he was dealing with an injury himself and we didn't see a whole lot. And so I was a little bit worried. I'm no longer worried. And I am excited to see him more and more every day. One thing that our buddy Stoney brought up during Paul Kaharski's show earlier today, which is an interesting point, something I'm already writing down to focus on the next time I'm out there at practice on Saturday, is everything we've seen from him so far has been largely inside underneath stuff, which is good, which is great. And, he jams at the line of scrimmage. He's physical. He's able to play in a phone booth like that and stay on a guy in the middle of the field and on underneath routes, which is a great skill to have. But what about over the top? What about going deep? Like what kind of coverage, what kind of length does he have as a cover corner on the outside, perhaps? Is that skill also in his bag? Now, we saw him do a lot of that at the Senior Bowl, and I don't remember ever being like, oh, well, there it is. See, that's why he'll be a day 3 guy, because he can't cover the outside. Do you remember thinking that, JT? I certainly did not. I thought that he was a versatile enough corner to play in or out. And so I want to see them, selfishly, I want to see them play him a little bit more there at practice, and I want to see what that looks like about, him versus Traylon Burks lined up wide up the sideline. What kind of coverage ability does he have in that role? Even if maybe they're not necessarily wanting to put him in that role all the time. I just felt, let's just show it to us. Let's see it real quick.
Little taste.
Yeah, just give us a little taste of that. So I think he's really exciting, and again, this is premature, but the last thing I'll say is just in my gut, the vibe for me is that he is this year's Tyjae Spears. You and me, and more primarily on the Tyjae Spears front, it was Zach and Stoney who really turned us on to him because they were at the Senior Bowl 2 years ago. We were not. We talked to them after the Senior Bowl. They were like, guys, this Tyjae Spears cat out of Tulane, keep an eye on him. And we both went and watched him. And we're like, really like this guy. I like what I'm seeing. And we were fans of his throughout the draft. Titans ended up getting him. He was the Senior Bowl crush. Somehow ended up on the Titans just by divine providence. And he proves himself to be a guy that we were right on early. Same thing, Senior Bowl crush. We were on him all throughout the draft season. divine providence, he ends up with the Tennessee Titans. He fits the mold of what they're looking for. If he ends up being a plus starter, I will never not go to the Senior Bowl again, because that's where you find the little gems. I'm gonna morph slowly into John Robinson and just draft Senior Bowlers for the rest of the time. I'm gonna be there.
Hey, I mean, is Rand Carthen already not doing that? I mean, 6 out of the 7 were Senior Bowlers.
He's like, Robinson. People don't know because he's not there. That he's smart about this. Don't go, but
don't
still
go,
pick them,
but still draft them. Yeah, okay, I got you. I did add the first clip there because it kind of confirmed what we were thinking as well, in terms of, Jarvis himself says, he's more about the pads and he's not all about this shorts and shirt kind of thing. And then we were talking about the last couple of weeks, like Jarvis Brownlee Jr., like we like him, but it's not a guy who's making a lot of plays out there. Well, him himself said, I turn it on when the pads come on. And that's what we saw at the Senior Bowl as well. And so that I thought that was interesting as well.
Yeah, I agree. Any more thoughts on the rookies, or do you want to save them for the article? Because people should go and read it. There's going to be stuff in there we didn't talk about here on the show today.
Yes, for sure. I think if you're interested on more of these rookies, I thought I would just shout them out because I think a majority of them had a really nice day at camp yesterday. So go read that either later today or tomorrow on Broadway Sports Media. So.
Okay, we're running low on time here, but I did tease at the beginning of the show a discussion that I wanted to have with you. We're going to have that discussion, and we have a couple of notes and a little bit of news. We will get out of here in the next 15 or 20 minutes, I promise. But I'd be remiss if we didn't discuss this. JT, something that I've noticed as I've been thinking about all of the quote-unquote problems the Titans have, and by problems I really mean the questions we have about this team, is that almost all of them are on the defensive side of the ball. Right? It is T'Vondre Sweat, drafted in the second round. Is he the guy that you need next to Jeffrey Simmons? Okay, the Titans desperately need a safety, and they go out and they get Jamal Adams. Is he the fix that you need at the safety position? Is he the answer? We don't know yet. Maybe they add somebody else, but if this is it, is that really what we think the Titans need? Not really. Kenneth Murray. They go and make that signing very early on in free agency. And that's a glaring hole the Titans have coming into the spring. They've got to get somebody, especially in terms of coverage, to play the linebacker position. And they go in, they get a guy that doesn't really fit that mold of linebacker. And so none of us really consider him to be a fix. And we talked about that a little bit on Tuesday about how funny it would be if he just proves us all wrong and is the fix for this team. But we're not there yet. Just all of these questions we have about them are on the defensive side of the ball. And it's got me thinking, the last one, I forgot the edge position now that they have gone and lost Arden Key. It seems Harold Landry is on one side. Who's going to be on the opposite side of the ball? You hear from Denard Wilson on Wednesday. We've got the guys in the room to be able to fill that role. We're not worried about it, which I think is some supreme coach speak. But what if it's not? And that's an idea that we kind of explored, Zach and I, on a football show earlier today, which again, I recommend you go and you check out because it kind of supplements today's shows. They work well together. Because I keep having questions about the way that Denard Wilson and Rand Carthen are constructing this defense, it is leading me to wonder, am I missing something? Am I misunderstanding the vision for this defense? What, the composition of the defense, like in my head, what I think they need doesn't seem to line up with what they think they need. And that makes me think, okay, then maybe the defense, what I think it's going to look like isn't what they think it's going to look like. And if so, what's the difference? What am I missing here? Because with Kenneth Murray, as I mentioned on Tuesday, I think, or maybe it was at some point this week, I mentioned how, hey, Kenneth Murray, the coaching staff has had unwavering faith in him so far, and he has done nothing but make impressive plays. I've not noticed him. I've not written down negative things about him at practice so far, JT. I don't think you have either. At least when we talked about it, you didn't seem to be all that fazed by him so far as a guy that's lacking out there. He seems to be doing his job just fine. And there've been a couple of times I've looked up and been like, wow, nice play by Kenneth Murray. He really triggered. He got downhill. That was a tackle for a loss. Look at that. And so if they prove us wrong on that, maybe they prove us wrong on a handful of things on this defensive side of the ball. And the last thing I'll say before I get your thoughts is that's kind of what we were talking about, Zach and I, on a football show is, hey, if Denard Wilson isn't joking about him thinking they have the guys in the room to fill the edge position opposite Harold Landry, and it's Thomas Rush, or it's Caleb Murphy, or it's Rashad Weaver, or, who am I missing? It's got to be one of those guys. Who'd they just add?
Shane Ray.
Shane Ray, thank you. Shane Ray. One of those 4 guys, or an amalgamation of them, is the fix. Like that's a bold hill to die on for Denard Wilson. But if he's right on the Murray front, and if he's right on the edge front, one, it'll be hard for us to really doubt Wilson going forward. He'll have bought himself a lot of goodwill. But 2, like wouldn't it track in hindsight to be like, we were really missing something there because they were right and we didn't see it?
Yeah, my answer to that question that you pose is that were we, because I agree with you. I think we were maybe looking at it through a lens of the Titans defense last year, fixing the holes that defense needed, instead of that's no longer the defense that the Titans will be playing. And I think that's where a lot of it may come from. We talk about last season, they had no answer over the middle because of the type of scheme that they played on defense with Shane Bowen. Well, Shane Bowen's no longer there. So is that a hole that they actually need, or can they supplement that somewhere else? And I think with Denard Wilson, it seems like he identifies traits that work in his system and that he can extract the best out of that player, even if, given the historics of player, are not what we thought they needed, it works for him. And I think that's the biggest thing. So when you talk about a guy in Denard Wilson, who, has kind of slowly over the last couple seasons built this pedigree that, he is a guy who has been able to make things work when they shouldn't have necessarily worked. I think in elevate teams.
I mean, the Ravens last year came to mind immediately when I thought about this. It's just that those pieces.
I mean, when you talk about a guy like
greater sum as a whole, yeah.
Yes, and when you talk about a guy like Patrick Queen, well, we were talking about this in the offseason. Patrick Queen is not exactly the greatest coverage linebacker, but it worked for them, right?
And he just got paid all the money because he had an amazing season with Denard Wilson.
Could he find what he needed in a Patrick Queen without having to break the bank and go get a Kenneth Murray? I think that's very plausible. Could they, without breaking the bank and going and getting a Carl Lawson who might cost a little bit more money, kind of create that rotational style that they had with a lot of the veterans in Baltimore last season? I think that's something that they could also do as well.
But it's a bold thing to try, right? Because if you're wrong, it's like he was there, and especially if Carl Lawson signed somewhere else, and he's like a serviceable starting guy to start the season, and you've got Hassan Haskins, Rashad Weaver just doing jack all over there on the side of the line. It's like, dude, we're all going to be wondering what exactly the thought process was here. So it's a very high risk, high reward decision to make.
Yeah, I'm with you, but then again, I think that if that then that has to be the philosophical shift, that this is a gamble. It's no longer basing it on what was last year's defense with Shane Bowen. No, this is the high risk, high reward type of defense, because I mean, it makes sense though, right? With how much they talk about aggression in the cornerback room is also high risk, high reward. If you don't get that aggression just right, the guy's going to blow past you and just, you're going to have busted coverage, right? But I think that if you're going to go along with what Denard Wilson is building on the back end, you have to assume that that's also what they're going to want to build on the front end. And I think that is going to be mixing in a lot of different looks. You're not going to get the same aggression every single time, but you're going to get aggression from different parts of the field. And so is it necessarily a problem that they're going to be throwing out this rotation when you're not maybe going to be relying on that side of the edge to send the house every single time, because you have guys like Kenneth Murray and Jamal Adams who can fake the coverage and blitz off the edge there? That could be the reason why they don't go out and get somebody, because they have enough different looks, even from guys like in the nickel. Like if you want to send like a Roger McCreary or something like that, they have enough different designed looks that they can always keep you they can always keep you guessing without needing a stalwart guy on that side of the line.
Yeah, I don't really have an answer to the question I posed. Besides, it's just to violently simplify it down to Gen Z terms. It's like, it's very much a what is he cooking in there situation. I don't quite know what he's cooking in there. You noted
Gen Z hater despite being a Gen Z.
I am, but I'll stoop to our generational
level. What is he
there.
Cooking?
What is he cooking in there? I do not quite know what he's cooking. Does he know what he's cooking? We'll see. We will see. Okay, we have a little bit of news left here today. JT, along the lines of the Arden Key situation, along the lines of who is going to play edge here. Is it tinfoil hat time for the news?
I guess like this is just something I thought I would bring up because it was not nothing. It was from a somewhat credible source today who reported that it was Kenmore at Kenmore Sports said the reported 6-game suspension of Titans edge rusher Arden Key is now under further review. That is why it hasn't been an official announcement from the league office. We'll see what happens. Interesting, however, really still think it's nothing because as we discussed earlier in the week, the NFL usually waits until Fridays to kind of announce those anyways.
My point is I think it is under review. They're reviewing it and they're going to confirm it soon.
Yeah.
Like I think that's I think somebody in power gave Ken Moore the truth technically that they are reviewing it and then eventually it's going to be confirmed.
Yes. And so that does bring up the possibilities of the he brings up the possibilities of who the Titans could sign if it indeed if Denard Wilson has a change of mind and a change of heart and it was simply just not coach speak and they want to go out and get somebody. The name that I think Paul Koharski brought up first with a big connection to Brian Callahan was Carl Lawson, the former Bengal. He was reportedly most recently going to a tryout today with the Dallas Cowboys, who the Cowboys had a multitude of guys come in today.
Well, they signed a couple of them. I don't know if you saw this. Two of them they've signed.
Carl Lawson, Shaka Tony, Al-Qadin Muhammad, and Justin Hollins. They end up signing Tony and Muhammad, meaning Justin Hollins and Carl Lawson are still free agents. So Lawson goes in for the tryout or they bring him in for a workout. He ends up not getting signed. So that means that the presumed top edge rusher still on the market is still out there for the Titans if they do indeed have any interest.
100%. By the way, did you see the way that Schefter tweeted this out about Al-Qadin Muhammad, where he's a former Colts pass rusher? And so Schefter originally tweeted, Colts sign former Colts pass rusher Al-Qadin Muhammad, which all the Colts fans having just lost, just lost for the season, a significant pass rushing piece in Ebukam. They're like, great, we get back a guy that knows the system. And then Schefter, he edited the tweet and he's like, the Cowboys have signed former Colts pass rusher. So tough break for the Colts could go and steal a guy like Carl Lawson now. So the Titans, for all of our talk of maybe Denard Wilson knows better. I'm still on the train of go get this guy. Please, you need to sign this guy. I don't. It's fun on paper to be like, well, maybe they can make it work with that. Don't try it.
The only thing that I think would have a hang up here is because his most recent AAV was around 15 million. At what point is the juice not worth the squeeze considering that you are Arden Key only missing 6 games? If this is a guy in Carl Lawson who's still trying to make $6 to $7 million, like how much is that? Like we talk about the inefficiencies.
Well, that's why I think the Cowboys didn't sign him, by the way, because I saw people saying like, wow, that group went in there and it was Tony and Muhammad that got signed. You're telling me that Lawson was worse than those guys? No, I'm telling you that Lawson wanted more money than those guys.
Yeah, and so at that point, we talk about, kind of the inefficiencies of this edge rushing group, even when Key is here. Mm-hmm. Is it? But then again, like that brings up the discussion, like, would Carl Lawson take a more like $3 to $4 million deal if you're guaranteeing him playing time for at least the first 6 weeks, if not more, because Arden Key's not there? Like, that would be the only reason. I think personally, as much as I agree with you that yes, they should bring him in, they're bringing him in for $7 to $8 million, which, that's getting pretty close to what the Titans have left, if I'm not mistaken, just to have 6 weeks guaranteed, but then have him as a rotational guy. Is that really worth it? And I get that we talked about how, it is the hardest part of the Titan schedule, but then again, like, is that really worth it when you could have other guys go down and want to bring in veterans? And then we talk about, they still have options when it gets to cut down, right? Maybe they'll wait until roster cut down and go from there.
All right, that's a wrap on today's show. Great one. Unexpected news broken here. So hoping that Paul Koharski's story on DeAndre Hopkins is the only interesting thing that happens today, and no more bad breaking news happens between now and the end of the day. Maybe you just go sign Carl Lawson. What
if the bad news is not exactly Titans related, but it's more towards Dameon Pierce and your love for him? What happens if that happens tonight?
Don't put that.
Sorry, my bad.
Don't put that on me, Bob. Don't put that, Ricky Bobby. Don't put that on me. Don't put that on us. We're going to be back on Tuesday. Just for folks that are wondering, the Titans are back at training camp with media available on Saturday morning and on Sunday morning. JT and I will be at those, so we'll have plenty of new training camp reactions to talk about next week. Until then, for producer JT, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're following us on our socials at Hot Read Pod on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. It's at Hot Read Pod. All kinds of content coming to you on all of those platforms that you'll want to check out from training camp and from the show. Until next week, have a great weekend. We'll talk to you then.
Do the survey.